Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. First and foremost, I wanted to thank you all so much for attending. My name is Julia, and I work on the marketing team at Circles, and I am so honored to have with us today the heartbreak expert, Dr. Guy Winch. Guy, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, if you're watching this webinar, that means you're either experiencing heartbreak or heartache or have in the past. And don't worry, you're not alone. In fact, in a recent YouGov poll, 79% of Americans indicated that they have experienced heartbreak in the past and have had their heart broken. Now, when you think about it on a large scale, that's nearly 261 million people who are dealing with heartache or have had their heart broken and are unsure of the steps to take to heal. And that is why we're so lucky to have Guy with us today, who will present a number of solutions to help repair your broken heart. Now, Guy is one of the world's leading psychologists. He is the author of the highly regarded How to Fix a Broken Heart. If you haven't read it yet, please do. And he's also an extremely popular TED Talk speaker. His videos have garnered over 25 million views. And at Circles, we're so proud that Guy has joined us as our new Chief Strategic Officer for our relationship circles to launch a new program aimed at helping millions of people heal from heartbreak and relationship pain. And this comes at such an important time because we're seeing so many spikes in breakups and divorces due to stressors that have been related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's more important than ever to take the steps to start your healing journey and heal from the heartache that you're experiencing. Now, a little bit about Circles for those of you who don't know. Circles is a leading platform for emotional support that ensures no one has to overcome life's challenges alone. Circles is built on the core principle that in order to overcome life's challenges, you need to be supported and heard by people who actually understand what you're going through, and that's the people who are going through it too. And our platform matches people who are going through the same life challenges, such as the loss of a loved one, parenting issues, or divorce. And all of our circles are led by mental health professionals that help create a safe space for all of our members to meet weekly over video, to have a 24/7 group chat, and also personal growth exercises to help you heal and start that healing process. Now, our new relationship-focused circles, again, will take place weekly and will be composed of 6 to 8 people who are dealing with the same relationship issues in their lives, and we'll focus on exactly why we're here today, to heal your heartache and to overcome heartbreak. Now, everyone who has attended this webinar will not only get actionable tips from Guy to help you heal, but will also receive a special gift from Circles, which we will discuss at the very end of this webinar. Now, during this webinar, we want to really understand how heartache affects our mental health and our well-being, and more importantly, how we can take steps to heal after a breakup. But before we officially get started, I just want to go over a few logistical things, which is that this is a webinar. So you can hear and see Guy and myself, but we can't hear you or see you. Now, that being said, just like I said in the beginning of this webinar, we do want to hear you and we do want you to share your voice. So you can submit your questions in the questions box on the screen, and we will get to them at the very end of this webinar. So if you have any questions for Guy or for myself about Circles, please don't hesitate to put them in the questions box. I'll be looking at them over the course of the webinar, and we will get to them as soon as we can. Now, that being said, there is no better time than the present to get started. So Guy, before we get into the nitty-gritty of heartache and heartbreak, I would love to hear from you what piqued your interest in studying heartache.
It's an interesting thing. I mean, I'm a practicing psychologist. I have a private practice. And there is, if you think about it as a psychologist, there is no other human experience that we can have that can take somebody who has no psychiatric history, no kind of issues, and heartbreak happens, and overnight they can turn into non-functional people that can't get out of bed and can't eat and can't sleep and are completely consumed and obsessed, and they can't focus and they can't work. And the only other experience we know that does that so immediately is grief. Now, heartbreak is a form of grief, but it's different because when you're mourning the loss of a loved one in that form of grief, you're just very sad and upset. Heartbreak makes people act completely out of sorts and do truly crazy things sometimes, and that is alarming to them, as well as the emotional pain and the distress of it. So what attracted me is that here's this one, as you said, 79% of people said they've been on, everyone knows certainly people. It's so common. It's so dramatic. And yet people tend to know very little about what's going on with them, why they're acting the way they are, what they can do about it. The advice they get is, oh, time will heal. Time might, but it might not. And so it to me was a really fascinating topic. And then when I started looking at the research, and especially the brain research, then I was like, wow, this is such an interesting thing. So I became really interested in it, and ended up doing a TED Talk and writing a book, and doing a lot of work around it.
Yeah, amazing. And we say the word heartbreak, but our heart doesn't literally break when we deal with a breakup, but it does really affect us psychologically. So can you go into more details about how heartbreak affects us psychologically and why it's actually so painful?
Yeah, I will just say parenthetically, I talk about this in the book a little bit, but there is a phenomenon called it's called broken heart syndrome, and that is that when the stress of heartbreak is so severe, people actually start to get cardiac symptoms, and when they go to the ER, there are a lot of symptoms that point to some kind of cardiac event. Like the certain hormones and all are like way too high, and there's something very abnormal going on, but it's actually related to the heartbreak. And they actually, one of the examples that was written up most recently was about a woman whose dog died, and she was so upset she landed in the ER with this real heart event, but triggered by. So sometimes your heart does literally break, but very rarely. So let's not be worried about that. But here's what does happen. Heartbreak causes really severe emotional pain, very severe. And I want to talk about how severe, because people say like, oh, it hurts. Really, how much does it hurt? So here's a study people did. I hope it's okay. I'm going to get into just a bit of the research because I think it'll be illustrative for people. People wanted to compare what happens in the brain when you experience heartbreak versus what happens when you experience physical pain. To that end, they put heat inducers on people's forearms, put them in functional MRIs and brain scanners, and started turning up the heat. And the assignment was, tell us when you can no longer stand 7 seconds of this. And usually it went up to like 9, something like that, 10 sometimes, but that's when people couldn't stand it. And then they put people in the same machine, or a different machine, different study, but they put people in who were heartbroken, and they had them think through the breakup as they were in that machine, and then they compared the brain scans to see how similar they look. And the brain scans of heartbroken people were similar to the people who felt the pain up to levels of around 8. Now,
Wow.
remember, for some of them, 9 and 10 were you couldn't tolerate for 7 seconds. Heartbreak, the pain lasts way longer than 7 seconds. So it's severe emotional pain. And as they were doing that, researchers were coming into the lab, and the researchers couldn't quite tell, wait, is this physical pain, when they looked at the brain scan? Because it looks so similar. And so the assumption is that those two pathways, those two systems, are highly linked in our brain. And so the pain we experience is emotional pain, but it's very much mimics physical pain, and it mimics severe physical pain, and it lasts for way longer than 7 seconds. It can last for, as people know, hours, days, weeks, even sometimes months and longer. So that's what happens to us, in terms of the pain. We experience this really bad psychological pain. But the other thing that happens is that when we experience psychological pain, we need to understand what's going on. And then this whole mechanism in our brain gets activated, in which we're trying to understand, well, wait a minute, what went wrong? Why did this happen? And then we start going down a lot of rabbit holes to try and figure out, well, why the breakup happened, even in cases in which it was very obvious because we were actually told why it was happened. So we get triggered psychologically to go on this quest for answers. We're in severe emotional pain. Heartbreak is a form of grief. It has all the hallmarks of traditional grief, except it's not sanctioned. Like if you, God forbid, lose a first-degree relative, you'll get time off at work and everyone will be very sympathetic. Few people are going into work saying, I got dumped, I'm very upset, because that's much less legit, even though the phenomena of it feels and looks very, very similar. So it's something that should be considered a very valid form of grief, because that's what people's experience is when they're going through it.
Wow, that's unbelievable. And let me know if this is somewhat related, but you mentioned in your TED Talk that brain studies have also shown that the withdrawal of romantic love actually activates the same mechanisms in our brain that get activated when like actual addicts go through withdrawal, when they withdraw from substances. So how can somebody who is heartbroken recognize that this is the actual process and the actual brain processes that they're experiencing, and then how can they then recover from that? Because when people are experiencing heartache or heartbreak, they don't really understand that they're actually withdrawing from something.
Right, and that's really, really important, because truly what happens in the brain is very similar to what happens in the brain of a heroin addict when they are withdrawing from the heroin. Now, when you say that, most people will be like, well, if there's a heroin addict and they're addicted and they're looking for a fix, they will do anything to get that fix, right? You know, they'll steal, they'll prostitute themselves, they'll be terrible in all kinds of ways. And we almost like forgive that part of it because, well, you know, they're an addict. They can't help it. Their brain is making them do desperate things. Very similar thing is happening in our brain when we're heartbroken. And people will see or will experience that same level of desperation, and they will be moved to do those similar kinds of acts. So somebody will send 100 texts in half an hour. It's not something they would ever do if they weren't heartbroken. But they're so desperate, they'll keep doing it. They'll keep doing it. They're told the person doesn't want to see them again, and they'll stalk them, and they'll knock on their door, and they'll go there until the police come and take them away because they're so desperate. They're so... Now, when people are moved to do these things, and they are out of character for everyone, because we are all at that extreme level, wherever you are, typically heartbreak takes you, you know, there. So people know that they're doing something that's so unusual for them, that's so out of character. And what a lot of people think is like, oh my God, I'm going crazy. Or they think, I need that this badly, you know, I just need that person. So understanding that what's happening to you is this process of your brain withdrawing and needing the fix, except it's not heroin, it's that person. That's the compelling thing that you feel. That's the thing that's driving you to do all these things, to take all these actions. You know, I've known very proud people who would grovel and beg, and they would never do that ordinarily, but that's the level of desperation. So knowing that will help you understand what's going on. No, you're not going crazy. This is your brain reacting to the withdrawal of something it found valuable and really responding in that same way. So understand it. But that doesn't mean you should indulge it, because a lot of the time, you know, just think of it this way, the heroin is not good for the addict. In fact, they should get off the heroin because it's making them do, you know, crazy stuff. And at the point that the relationship is over, you should try and move forward. So the incredible urge and compelling, you know, like need you have to do all these things, you have to try and find ways to distract, to limit it, to mitigate it as much as possible, because every time you do the crazy thing, it's just going to make you feel worse. And now there's another rejection to deal with, and now you really feel even worse, and now you feel like even more desperate. So you're just feeding that monster. And so it's important to know it's very, very difficult to resist, but you should try and wage that battle of resisting it.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I get to my next question, I see that so many of you have already submitted a bunch of questions, which is amazing, and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. So thank you for submitting them. And if you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to submit them in the questions box. We would love to answer them. Now, Guy, back to you. So along that vein, why do so many people struggle to recover from heartbreak? What keeps people stuck in that phase?
So there are two aspects to the recovery. One, and for people who are newly heartbroken, the most important one is you need to avoid doing the things that will set you back. If you think of heartache as a wound that we have on our hand, there are things you can do that will just pick the scab off the wound and expose the wound over and over. And if you keep doing that to a wound, the wound will not heal. So you first have to understand what are the things that are making the wound activate and bleed and fresh again, and you have to avoid doing those. And that is difficult to do, primarily because your mind is going to tell you to do all the worst things possible. One of the hardest things about heartbreak is that when we're heartbroken, our mind tells us to do almost the opposite of what we should be doing. And we tend to listen to what our mind, but my gut is telling me I need to do it. Your gut is telling you need to fix, and that's why you're trying to do it. But that's not the best thing for you. But it feels that way. So that's the one thing that we have to, that people really struggle with, that they keep making the mistakes, they keep setting themselves back. And admittedly, it's very difficult to resist, but at least you should know what those are and try to. And the second thing is there are very active steps you need to take in order to heal. And people tend to think of the recovery, as I said earlier, as time is good, I'll wait it out. But there are very active things you can be doing to accelerate that timeline, to mitigate some of the pain that you're feeling, and to start a real process of recovery. And to the extent that the relationship was significant, and to the extent, certainly if you were living together, or if, there's truly a lot of recovery steps that need to be had. So those are the two prongs of it. Number one, let's not make too many mistakes that are going to set us back, and let's take active steps to heal.
Amazing. And I think I already know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, do you believe in the no contact rule? Because so many people say, don't contact them, it's over, don't do it, don't even try. I have a feeling that you're a big promoter of that, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, should you contact the heroine when you're trying to get off heroin? No, you should not. Now, to the extent that there is outstanding business to be had, and sometimes there is, that's one exchange. I'll drop off your stuff, you drop off my stuff, you can do that in one go. People, do it all the time. And the no contact rule means no physical contact, no virtual contact, no contact. And I'll explain why in a minute. But the point of no contact means social media, for example. Today, actually, everyone knows, I think Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp all went down. And so that was good for heartbroken people. I'm telling you right now, not good maybe for Facebook, but or for others. But don't wait for that to happen. In other words, the social media is where we really get a glimpse of the other person and their life, and it's really painful to see. And we'll talk about why in a minute. But no, you shouldn't do that. Your goal in recovery, you can formalize it different ways, but here's a simple way to think about it. Your goal is to reduce the space and time they have in your thoughts as much as possible, ongoing, until it's not there, until you only think of them once in a while, and it doesn't hurt when you do. But you have to get them out of your head. Now, when it's fresh, it's 90% of the time they're in your thoughts. It's an intrusive thought. You're not asking even to think about them, but it's everything will remind you of them. You're talking about it, you're processing it. Now, at first you should, because you need the social support and you need the understanding and you need to, come to grips and acceptance and all of those things. But that's different than actually going and stalking them. It's different than, like looking through all the pictures and going through all the emails and looking at the text that they sent you a week before and say, but they were so nice a week before, what happened? And those are very, very painful things to do. So as much as you can minimize contact, you should. Now, a lot of people, and I'm sure we're going to get some questions about it, are like, but we have kids, but we work together. She married my second cousin. She's my neighbor. Try not to get into relationships with your neighbor. But there's circumstance in which it's very difficult to not see that person, and certainly that makes things more complicated. But you can try and minimize that as possible. If you work with them, you can try and, these days, if you can work virtually, do that. If you have kids together, it's a slightly different story. You have to transition to co-parenting, to a more kind of, role of partnering, to get a certain job done. But you can even ask for, some time. If you're divorcing, there's also a divorce process, and often there are lawyers involved and there are other feelings involved. So that gets much more complicated. But if you don't have to, if you can have no contact, it will be best for you. It's hard to do, but the more strict you can be about it, the better for you, the quicker you'll move on. Unfortunately, it's difficult, but that's the thing to do.
Okay, and circling back, no pun intended, to the name of this webinar, which is how to rebuild your self-identity after a breakup. How does a breakup even affect your self-identity, and how do you recover from that? What are the challenges people face in recovering their self-identity after experiencing a breakup?
So our identity is interwoven into our relationships, right? When we enter a relationship, we become a we rather than an I. I do want to acknowledge that for a lot of people who are heartbroken, they were not in a relationship. They were either dating, they might have even had one date and gotten their heart really badly broken. And so they didn't really form that we. It's still very legitimate, your heartbreak. It's still very valid. I don't want to, marginalize you in what I'm saying. But for people who are in a relationship that they live together with a person, they were with them for a long time, there's a lot of we that, how was your weekend? Well, we did this. Where did you go? Well, we went here. And you have to figure out what you're going to do in the weekend, right? Because you'll get up and figure it out together, kind of thing. Relationships require a lot of blending of lives and a lot of compromise. And then when you take that apart, then it's like literally taking something apart that's been fused. Even this basic going from we to I is a massive shift. It's a big shift in identity, going from a we to an I. That takes time to adjust. Beyond that, you have a lot of people, for example, their social lives were via their partner. And so when they have a breakup, they're suddenly left with very few friends because they kind of lost touch with theirs because they were with the other person's. And, they might have been very close with the person's family and they lost that. And suddenly the whole, who am I in the world? Like, I'm not in a relationship. I don't have that family that was supportive. I don't have a circle of friends even. I really am starting from scratch to define myself. And you are a lot of the times after heartbreak. But that is an active process, because the questions you should be asking yourself in these moments are, all right, well, let's say it was a 2-year relationship. Let's say it was a 20-year relationship. Who was I before this? Do I want to go back to that? Do I want to reinvent? What compromises did I make that I will now want to take back? Yes, I stopped going to see those kinds of films and seeing those kinds of friends. Maybe I want to reconnect because it didn't work well with my partner, but maybe I've grown and they're no longer who I want to hang out with, and that's no longer what I want to do. There's so many of these things. Starts with what brand of toothpaste I'm using, because I use theirs, we use that one, and now which one? And now what do I want to eat? And now what do I want to go to restaurants? And what kinds of friends? Because they came with a whole group of them. They were just packaged. I didn't make the choice. They were just there. I like them. But if I'm to make my own friends, what kind of friends do I need? And friends, it's like a village. It's like a baseball team. You need different people for different positions, So how do I go about finding those friends? Do I reconnect with the old ones? Do I look for new ones? Do I move? Do I stay in the same place? How do I rearrange my physical space to reflect me rather than we? All of these, I'm just giving a few examples, but all of these are very active questions that people need to ask themselves. And this is not, you break up yesterday and today you've already redecorated and found 20 new people, and that's not going to be the case. It takes time. But that is the process that over time you want to engage in.
Okay, and how important is it in terms of recovery to have an understanding of why the breakup even happened?
So here's it's a double-edged sword, because it's actually important to have an understanding in order to put the question to rest. You don't really need to have an understanding to move on, but if it's bugging you, you do, and it's bugging most people. So not everyone. Some people are like, okay, fine, it's done. I don't care why. But that understanding is, in some cases, in rare cases, somebody will break up with you and literally say, I can't be in this anymore because you're A, B, C, and D. And they're like, ooh, okay, but they told you. That's rare. Usually when people are with you for a while, unless it's a big thing that happened, a big fight about something and that could be unusual, then they drifted emotionally. They're no longer into it, or they thought it would work, but it doesn't quite work for them, etc. It's not something dramatic that happened. And then they will give you a talk in which they'll say, it's not you, it's me, it's a matter of chemistry, or it's timing, or I'm just not feeling it anymore, I don't think this is for me anymore, whatever the thing is, they'll give you a nice thing to say. The real problem is that the actual truth about most breakups is uninteresting and unsexy. It's they drifted emotionally, you kind of grew apart. They thought they were in it, but they weren't quite in it. Like it's not that compelling, but the pain you feel is so dramatic that for people, when they're in such pain, they want to understand there must be a dramatic reason for me to be in so much pain. There's got to be something big that happened. But often there's not. Usually there's not. So what's important there is either take what they told you at face value if it's not insulting. If it's like, I just drifted, or I'm just not feeling it anymore, I'm just not in love anymore, or I wanted to be in love, I never quite got there, I care for you, but not enough. And that's the reason. You just have to accept it and get to the point of, okay, that's the reason. And it's more important to accept a reason than to not, because that closure is important. Sometimes you don't get anything. There are the people who just leave the house empty and leave a post-it, or not even a post-it. I've heard of many cases in which somebody just left without a word, and they're just like, are they missing? Are they dead? Did they leave me? What happened? And then you found out, well, sometimes over social media, oh no, they just left. So they didn't even give you anything. And in that case, if that person left the relationship at any point without saying anything, and they didn't tell you what the reason is, I'll tell you what the reason is, they're not the most nice, kind, mature, compassionate, people, if that's how they left the relationship. So definitely it was them, because if you leave a relationship like that, it probably had something to do with why that relationship wasn't working in the first place. But come up with something if you don't have a reason, or accept what they told you if it's not insulting, and put the matter to rest, because it doesn't really matter. It's done.
Yeah, absolutely. And, sometimes when we get the reason and we have an understanding of where they happened, they still feel like blindsides. We're still completely blindsided that this has happened to us. So why is that the case?
So I worked, there's one case I talk about in the book, and I don't remember exactly the numbers, but this person broke up with his girlfriend over 10 years, maybe 8 times.
Wow.
They broke up together, like one him, one her, one him, one her, one him, like 8 times over 10 years. And when the final breakup happened, he was shocked. He was like blind. It was such a surprise to him. And I'm like, well, it was happening like every year, so you should have. But here's why it's a blind side. The person doing the breaking up, if you're in a relationship, and again, in most cases, they don't hate you. They didn't suddenly discover that you're a horrible person. They just drifted. They're just not into it anymore. And so they don't want to hurt you. And so if you have this big presentation coming up at work, if you had planned a vacation and now it's a week before the vacation, or the holidays are coming up and you're going to go, a lot of times, people will say, you know what, let's go on the vacation. It's okay, I don't hate the person, or we'll do the holidays, or we'll get through the presentation, and they'll be nice and they won't give you a hint that this is going on until afterwards, out of consideration on their end. And they're trying to be kind about it. But it's very confusing because, and I've dealt with so many of these. A week ago, we were on vacation and we had sex and we laughed and we had a great time. Both of us had a great time. I was there. I couldn't have had it alone. We both had a great time. How is it 4 days later they're breaking up with me? And it's because that was their plan. And they're breaking up with you. Apparently, they care for you. They like you. They're just not in love with you. So they could happily have a good time with you. They didn't hate you all of a sudden. You've been together for a while for a reason. But it's so confusing when that happens, when you're on the other side of it, because you're like, how do things go so well and suddenly on a dime? And no, that was planned. And a lot of times the relationship gets better when somebody made a plan like that, because they don't have to have the fights anymore. They let things go a lot. They don't bring things up because they know they're out. And so they can say, like, it's been our best couple of months, like, because those are probably the couple of months when they decided that they're out. And so they were much easier to be around. But that's why. But it's confusing because people don't share that. People don't share when they're thinking of breaking up. Like, no one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm not sure I want to be in this. Pass the cornflakes. It's not something people do. You know, they will hold it. They'll reserve it until they're sure. So, but that makes it the blind side in most cases for the other person, unfortunately.
Right. And that leads me to my next question, which is actually twofold. The first is that you mentioned in your TED Talk that idealizing your ex is natural but not helpful. So can you provide tips as to how to not idealize your ex? And secondly, how does one strike a balance between not doing that but also not villainizing them either?
So look, the thing about idealizing is that this is something our mind does to us. It kind of, it just, you know, when we get intrusive thoughts about the ex, they're never the bad ones. They're always, oh, that lovely moment we had and that fond moment we had. And they're so painful, those moments, because you're actually getting reminded by your mind about all the good times. And people will literally sit and say to me, like, they were perfect for me. This person was perfect for me in every possible way. And I'm like, not in every possible way, because the best way for them to be perfect for you is if you were perfect for them, because that's what works best. But that's the tendency to just remember all the great, great things. Now, when I work with somebody one-on-one, we can start drilling down, and I will come up with a list of all these things in which, well, here's a compromise you made. See, that thing was a problem for you. That thing was a problem for you. Oh, the way they handled this was always a problem. You can always come up with things. And so because our bias when we're heartbroken is to idealize, my suggestion is always make a list of all the ways the person wasn't right for you, wasn't a good match for you, the ways they were not, and the ways in which the relationship wasn't great for you. All the compromises you made, specific moments that they handled very poorly to remind you that they were, you know, they were so loving. Really, no arguments at all, you know, and oh, well, there were those, and, you know, so you want to remember that it was a mixed bag, that it wasn't all idealized. And what I say is when you start having the idealized thoughts, check the list, remind yourself, because you need to balance that out. Now, this is not to villainize them. The list is the negative list. Your brain is supplying the positive list. So the idea is not to villainize them. If you're not idealizing them, if you're sitting there seething about them and all you can think about is how hateful they are, no need to make a list, you got it covered. But if you are tending to romanticize it, to idealize it, to think of all the great times, then you do perhaps want to make that list, keep it on your phone and check it and remind yourself literally every 5 minutes if you need to, nope, it wasn't perfect. Here's that thing that happened. Nope, it wasn't perfect. Here's that thing that happened. They didn't like that person and that was a great friend and I lost touch with them because of it. You know, there's always stuff. Remind yourself of it. It's useful.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And on the flip side of that coin, sometimes when we're broken up with, and I'm sure I speak for many people out there and for some of you who are listening and watching right now, that sometimes when we're broken up with, we actually blame ourselves. We fall into that self-blame rabbit hole where we say to ourselves, well, they broke up with us, so there must be something wrong with me then, because you know, why else would they break up with me? And then you sort of fall down that hole of going through all the reasons why they could have possibly broken up with you and what you could have done wrong. So how does someone crawl out of that rabbit hole?
First of all, it's a very natural tendency we have, an automatic one after we feel rejected, and certainly we do after a breakup, is again to try and understand the pain, to try and understand, well, what went wrong. And part of our thoughts were not, I wasn't enough. Because if I was enough, they wouldn't have broken up with me. People always phrase that to me and they think, aha, you see, it's not about I'm good or bad, I just wasn't enough. And I'm like, it's actually not about enough, because that's like a quantity thing. You have to be a little bit more of this or a little too. It's about a match. It's about how two people fit. So enough is not relevant. It's like, did you fit enough? And maybe you didn't fit enough, but that's not on you. That's on both of you, and no one is to blame because it's a matter of fit. But the mistake people make is they start looking at all their faults and all their shortcomings, and then all their insecurities come to the surface, and everything they hate about themselves comes to the surface, and they start thinking like, well, if only I were more successful, If only I were blonder, if only I were taller, if only I were shorter, if only I were bigger, if only I were smaller. And it just, but these are just your own insecurities that are coming up. And the one that I hear so much from people is like, maybe they didn't find me attractive anymore. And I'm like, it's not that you've been married, in these cases, 30 years and something physically changed about you dramatically. You've been together for 6 months. If everything was fine for 4, then it's not about it's not about that, oh, but if I were attractive enough. I'm like, no, attraction wanes, period. So it doesn't matter how attractive, and it's not about that. It's about, again, fit in a much more general kind of way. Now, are there mistakes you might have made in the relationship? Sure. You know why? Because everyone does. So by definition, you made mistakes. So did the other person. We all do. Is it useful to try and figure them out for next time? Yes, why not? If you can fit, but figure them out in the service of next time I need to keep my eye on this, rather than, oh, I'm such an idiot. If I didn't do that. Like, we're not perfect. We're going to do us. And then the question is, do us work? Maybe you should have voiced things that you didn't voice. Important note for next relationship. Maybe you should have set limits that you didn't set. Important note for next relationship. All these things are things that you can make notes of. And I'm not saying that, I say literally make notes of, because you will not remember it by the time you get into the next relationship. You'll be all excited. You will need the reminder. So to the extent that that's useful, do that for a day or two, but then stop, because you can get lost there. It is a rabbit hole, and you can just get lost on your mistake, the mistakes you made, and you didn't make that many mistakes. And again, if they're that pronounced, and note them and then move on from it. But don't get lost in trying to find the explanation with you, because it's not about whether you were enough, you were good enough. It's about a fit. It's about a dynamic, an interaction between two people. It's not about one person. And if you're going to spend time thinking about one person, think about them. Think about what they did wrong. Think about, and here's one, the drifting emotionally. It's a shame they didn't mention that to you when it started. It's a shame they didn't say, I'm feeling a little disconnected. Maybe we can talk about it, and then given you a chance to address it. They just hoarded that and didn't tell you. So that one is on them, not on you. And I can come up with a bunch of other ones that are on them generically in most situations. So don't go down that rabbit hole, because you're already in plenty pain. You don't need to hit yourself when you're down.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of which, when we're feeling down after a breakup, how important is it to have a support network? How helpful is it to talk about what you're going through with the people around you?
Well, this is why I joined Circles, because social support has been shown to be a very, very important factor. And what's important most for people when they're heartbroken is that people get it. People get why they're upset. Because sometimes friends will say, well, I never liked them anyway. What has that got to do with anything? Not helpful,
Right.
right? Or your parents will like, well, you shouldn't have gone with that one. Like, again, not helpful. So you want to be supported by people who can, A, listen well, and express the emotional validation, and be compassionate and be supportive. And by the way, that's the whole point of Circles, finding people with a similar circumstance, right? So people who are broken up but don't have kids, and so they don't have to deal with that, or people who do, and they want to talk with people who are like, I'm going to see them all the time now. That sucks. What do I do? You want to talk to people who are in that situation. So that support is important, and it's important that it comes from people who understand you and who get you. And it's important to reach out to people to get that support. And it's important to think about who you're reaching out to, because you want to reach out to people who are more likely to give it to you. That friend who's been critical of your partner all along might not be if they are supportive, great for them, they should be. But it might be harder for them to be supportive. Reach out to the people who tend to be more compassionate and supportive in your life. They are the ones who can help you. Or again, Circles, that's the point of this whole endeavor, is to provide that with professional guidance, because I think it's very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly useful. Well, Guy, that's all the questions I have, but now we can get the questions from all of you. And actually, we got a couple before the webinar even started from Shanley and Christy. Shanley and Christy, if you're here, feel free to raise a virtual hand and submit a comment in the questions box. But they both wanted to know, when do you know to truly walk away versus reaching out to win your partner back?
Look, here's the thing. somebody broke up with you, and some people do it in a kind of waffly way, like, yeah, I kind of want to break up, and it's like qualified, and they're not quite sure, and then, but they want to stay friends, and they want to be in your life, but you know, and you think like, so do they really want to break up? Do they not? Do I try and win them back? Or even if they don't, how do I try and win them back? Maybe there's a reason I can give, and something like that. So here's the thing, and I work with a lot of couples who broke up and then came back together, sometimes more than once. It doesn't work unless, here's the unless there can be a discussion between the two of you that's very open and honest about what wasn't working in the first go round, i.e., what do you both need to do differently? Not just what their complaints were, but what yours are. Because what often happens is that one person breaks up, the other person tries to get them back, they give it another round, but that person then is so relieved the person is back. That's great, but by a week later, they're not relieved, and now they're just really annoyed that they were put through it. So then there's that resentment. So it can be difficult. So if you're going to get back together again, it's only if both of you really want to, and you have it in you, both of you, because one person can't do this alone, to talk about what wasn't working and how you can maybe do things differently. What do we need to do differently? Unless there's a clear understanding between the two of you of what that is, there's no reason to think that it won't happen in the same way again, in a more accelerated pace this time, because you already know the moves, you're just going through them much more quickly. It's rare that you can get someone back. It does happen, but only if they're willing. If they're not, don't try. Or if you tried and they're not, give it up, because it's unlikely to succeed anyway. Only if they're really into trying might it. And if they're giving you a hard time about trying, then don't waste your time, because that didn't work for them. Doesn't matter why, it didn't. So that's not gonna, you know, the gap is too large. You have to give it up and you have to walk away. If you have somebody who's saying like, you know what, I'm willing to talk about it with you, I'm willing to discuss it, but what we would do differently, have the discussion. But that's
Yeah,
gonna
that
be
was,
rare. It's gonna be rare.
yeah, wow, that was very insightful. Thank you. And we have another question here. Well, we have so many questions here. Thank you to
Yeah,
everyone who's,
let's get to some from the question box of people who are writing now.
so I see here one from Michelle. Michelle asks, how do you get your partner to agree to marriage counseling, and how do you get your partner to tell you the reason they left?
If they left, it's going to be really hard to get them to come to marriage counseling. I am assuming, Michelle, that you've asked them why they left and they didn't tell you for whatever reason. If that's the case, it's a little unfair of them to say nothing, you know, in that regard, or they said something and you're just, no, but that's not the real reason. Again, Michelle, the real reason is likely they just fell out of love, they got infatuated with someone else or not, or they fell out of love first, then did, or they just felt like it's not really working for them, or they never really were fully in love. Those are typically the answers. Again, they're not interesting, they're not sexy, they're not, you know, satisfying in any kind of way, but those are the answers. The marriage counseling is something you want to do when you're in the relationship and experiencing problems, and you want to do it. First, what you want to do is sit the person down and say, hey, can we talk about how things are going, and let's maybe put our heads together and talk about how we make things a little bit better, because I notice we're either fighting a lot or we're disconnected, we don't really do much together, we don't really talk like we used to. So you want to start doing that in the relationship. If you're finding that your arguments are very unproductive and you just can't, it's just frustrating because the same thing happens, they just don't get anywhere, there's no good resolution, that would be the time to say, look, we are unable to have productive disagreements. We just fight, but we don't resolve it. Neither of us feels good afterwards. Let's go for a couple of sessions, get some tips on how to have these conversations better, how to argue a little bit better, and that might help us, and we can then get through them in a way that's more productive and less frustrating for both of us. You can suggest that when you're in the relationship. It's a little harder to suggest after.
Amazing. And we have another question from David. David says, I think you touched on this earlier, but what are your thoughts on closure? Is it truly possible to get closure?
You can give it to yourself at any time. You can give it to yourself at any time. by just saying to yourself, that didn't work out. For whatever reason, they didn't alert me to what was wrong for them or what they needed or that they were dissatisfied. They just decided to end it, or they did tell me and somehow I didn't hear it or it wasn't registering, in which case, note for next relationship, pay a lot of attention. But it is difficult to sometimes get a clear response. And I often say, you probably don't want to hear the real one, because, like, well, here's the thing, I never really liked your mother, and you do this when you sleep, and you're like, those aren't the real reasons people break up, and you don't want to hear like a litany of things they don't like about you. What's the use of it? But assume, again, like in most situations, they were drifting emotionally. They just were not fully in it. They weren't fully committed. They had commitment issues. They were self-involved and they didn't want to share with you what they needed to share with you. You know them well enough to come up with a reason that you think is correct, that doesn't involve you, that doesn't make you the bad person. That's the condition. So David, come up with something that's about them and their shortcomings and their inability to communicate about things sufficiently. That doesn't mean that you're the bad person. And then that's the one. And you just go with that. But give yourself that closure. It's a gift.
Yeah, so true. And I have a question here from Shan, who asks, can you give your insights on ghosting? It is really hard to deal with after a 6-month relationship. So Guy, what are your insights on ghosting?
I'm against it. I'm joking. I mean, it's really a very unfortunate phenomena. It's incredibly disrespectful, cowardly, rude, and immature, if you ask me. Now, there are some cases in which the person has tried to have conversations or tried to explain, and they just get yelled at or screamed at in a way that they're just like, I'm not going to deal with this anymore, and that's why they ghost. But in most situations, it's just immaturity, just cowardice. It's just the person cannot deal with having to explain themselves, or they can't deal with seeing you so distressed or you so upset, so they just run away from it. And it's painful, it's unfortunate, but what I'll say, Shan, is that it says something very significant about the person you were with, that they would do that, right? It means that they were immature and unkind and inconsiderate and disrespectful. And keep that into account. That's the person you were with. Maybe that's someone, it's not so bad that they left. If that's how they deal with it, then maybe that's not someone you wanted to be with.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we actually have a question here about circles. The question is, I know I need support, but I'm really nervous to talk about my struggles with strangers. How can I know that it's a safe space for me to be honest and not be judged? So that's an amazing question, and it's a question that we get, honestly, a lot of the time. And to be honest, we completely understand that it can be intimidating to join a circle. It can be scary, but you will not be judged in your circle, and it is a safe space for a number of reasons. First of all, like I mentioned earlier, all of our circles are facilitated by mental health professionals who are there to ensure that communication in the circle is both smooth and constructive and helpful and supportive. So they are really there to cement that safe space. And secondly, you can't be judged in your circle because, like I said, we match you with people who are going through the same thing. So you can't be judged by people if they're standing in the same shoes as you are. And that's really the magic of a circle. It's what makes circles such a safe space, is that you are actually with people who get it. The people who are listening to you talk about your situation can actually empathize with you because they're either going through it or they have been through it. So you can be honest, you can be true to yourself and true about your feelings, because I can almost guarantee you that someone in your circle will have felt the same way. So not only will you get better by listening to others, but you will get better by helping others get out of the situation that you yourself are in as well. So that's really what makes circles so special. And that is such a great question. And if anyone else has any other questions about circles, please feel free to share them.
I'm just going to add something quick to that. You are coming into these circles knowing that the other people there are also heartbroken. So you know that about them. So you're each going to go around and tell your story. People feel that way when they come to therapy. When they come to see me for the first time, they're like, I don't know who you are, and I'm supposed to like spill my guts. I'm like, just start one gut at a time, you know, like, but it's a conversation. People feel nervous for exactly 30 seconds. They start speaking, and then there's an interaction, and the other person, you'll be comfortable within 5 minutes. That first 5 minutes might feel a little jittery to you, but I promise you, the minute you start speaking and you hear from other people, and you'll feel comfortable very, very quickly.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That actually touches on something where, you know, the stranger aspect, you know, I don't know them. I don't know who these people are, but you actually already know them because you know what they're going through, and that's a really good foundation to build on. So that's actually an amazing point, Guy. And I have an amazing question from Kay for you. Kay asks, hey Guy, what if I have recognized a common theme through a series of relationships that they usually end in a toxic way despite me trying? What does that say about me?
This answer is not going to be that satisfying. It absolutely says something about you. Specifically, I don't know what, because I don't know the circumstance. But it could be things like if it gets toxic, and you're the one that's saying, just given the tone of that question, I'm assuming that you're not introducing that toxicity, but it's coming at you. You have to look at the people that you're choosing, number one. And are there signs of this toxicity in them early on? We know that we can see signs of where the relationship problems are going to be from a first date, if you go back and look at that first date. So go back and look at your first dates and kind of see were there signs of this, the first few dates, kind of like what were the signs of this toxicity kind of thing happening. Number two, if it was happening, were you setting limits with it? Or were you just trying to manage it? You know, in other words, sometimes when somebody's very demanding or somebody's very, very difficult, we just try and manage them. But what we forget to do is say, I'm sorry, we've just been talking about this for 30 minutes and I have to be up in 6 hours, so I'm not talking about it now. I want to go to sleep. You know, we forget to set that limit. We forget to kind of advocate for our own needs. There can be many reasons, hey, why that happens. I can't know what they are without knowing more detail, but you can. So go back, look at the patterns and look at them early on. When do you notice the toxicity? What do you do about it? Do you do enough? Do you tolerate it when you shouldn't? What are you contributing to that toxicity? If anything, maybe you're not, maybe you are. But since you notice a pattern, break the pattern down more specifically now into what they're bringing, what you're bringing, what you're doing, and again, what you're not doing. A lot of the times it might be like not setting limits, not speaking about you. If all your conversations were about them and their feelings and not about you and your feelings, that's a problem. So look for the pattern. You'll be able to find more patterns once you notice that one.
That's a great piece of advice. And I see another question about circles, which is, I'm constantly thinking about my ex, even though we broke up 2 years ago. I'm embarrassed to talk about it with my friends and family. I'm thinking a circle will be good for me, but how does it work? So first of all, great question. And like we said, you can't be embarrassed to talk about your struggles with your circle because they're going through it too. In terms of how does it work, like I mentioned earlier, all of our circles are led by a mental health professional, and our circles meet once a week over video. You have a 1-hour video session with your circle. You also have a 24/7 group chat where you can speak to your facilitator and the members of your circle literally whenever you'd like. It's on your phone, so you can literally carry your circle with you in your pocket. And we also have personal growth exercises that you can use as well. So like, you know, I mentioned, your circle is always available to you. At Circles, we believe that emotional support should be accessible to everyone, everywhere, no matter where you are. So that is how it works. Again, weekly video session, 24/7 group chat, and endless support from your facilitator and from your circle. Now, Guy, I think we could probably squeeze in 1 or 2 more questions. I have one here from Aphrodite, which is, how do you get over the resentment of being left for someone else?
That resentment is toward 1 or 2 people. It's either toward the ex that left you for someone else, or it's toward the ex that left you and the person they left you for, because sometimes that's somebody you might know. resentment is about a feeling of fairness, essentially. That's what resentment is, a feeling of unfairness. And the best way you can get over the resentment is to find someone for you. In other words, to move on and to find someone. Now, again, I'm going to repeat this message because to me it's the most important. They left you for someone else. Were there, in hindsight, you didn't see it in the moment, in hindsight, were there signs that they were disengaged? Were there signs that they weren't being loyal? Were there signs that they were drifting emotionally or less communicative? Were there changes in their behavior that you missed? Maybe you can, if you can identify any of those, there might be good notes to keep for the next relationship, like, oh, if they're spending too many late nights at the office, or if, you know what I mean, that kind of thing. So you might benefit from doing a little bit of that exploration, but ultimately, a person who is leaving you for someone else who didn't give you a chance to repair the relationship that you were in, that's unfortunate. And the best way to get over it is to understand that that says something about the person you're with, that's not flattering, and that you need to now find somebody who's a little bit more loyal, a little bit more committing, and a little bit more communicative. And the best thing you can do to get over the resentment is to say that, okay, if they left, and especially if they cheated, cheating tends to be a pattern. So if they cheated on you and they left for someone else, good luck to that person, whoever they are, because they might be the next person that person leaves. But getting on with your life is the best thing you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, we have 2 minutes left, but I think this question is really important. So Guy, let's try to answer it as quickly as we can. Wayne left a very emotional question, which is, I am 1 week in, gutted, physically sick, tried to make it right. She said I was not affectionate enough. I was attentive and loving. She would not reconsider, even though it was no previous breakup and only 2 arguments in 2 years. Thanks for any help.
So first of all, I'm so sorry. This is the most painful time, right? It's a week in, you're talking about it. She's telling you you weren't affectionate enough, you know, but she didn't give you enough time to work on that. If she voiced that to you over those 2 years and you ignored it, note for future relationship, don't ignore what seem like small relationship complaints, because they turn out perhaps to be significant for someone or not, if that were the case. But often, you know, if it's something as mild as you weren't affectionate enough, yeah, it indeed isn't the most satisfying answer. Really what's going on was she was drifting, she wanted more, she didn't communicate. There was something that she wasn't doing, because people can come and say, hey, this is bothering me, this is not working for me, let's work on it. Relationships are work, you have to communicate about them. She wasn't doing that with you. It's a problem that she wasn't, because it didn't give you a chance. All you can do is learn from that for the next relationship. Like, you don't have to wait for the other person to talk to you if there's a problem. You can check in on a regular basis, once a month, say, hey, let's have a talk about how things are going and whether we need to do things better for one another or not. I don't really have anything, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to voice any concerns you had, because I want to hear them and be able to respond. You know, you can start that pattern. That would be kind of useful. But if she's not willing to give you a chance, then it means that she started breaking up with you way before she actually did, because she's already quite disconnected. Again, she took that running start and you didn't know about it. But then do the math there and figure out, okay, so that has been going on for a while. She wasn't someone who communicated with me. That is going to make the relationship very difficult. And if she does take you back at any point to what I said earlier, you're both going to have to do things differently. You're going to have to be more affectionate, but she's going to have to be more communicative. And you're going to have to try and get her to be more communicative. And although that I think is probably unlikely once somebody breaks up and she doesn't sound like she's giving you any openings, learn what you can from this and take it to the next relationship, because I know this hurts a ton now, but once you're over it, if you learn things from it, it sets you up to have a much more successful and satisfying relationship next time. I know that must seem far for you right now, but you will get there.
Yeah, thank you, Guy. And unfortunately, not only are we out of time, but we're over time. It's 9:01 EST. So, Guy, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your wisdom. I think I speak for everyone when I say we all really appreciate it. I also want to thank all of you for attending and for participating and for asking your questions and sharing your stories. I hope that this webinar was beneficial for you and that you're all leaving today feeling better and having taken the first step on your healing journey. But now that you've taken that first step, an amazing second step would be to join circles. And just like I mentioned, no one should deal with heartache alone. And when you join a circle, you won't have to. You'll have a group of people who not only know exactly what you're going through, but who are going to support you for every step of the way. And we have circles for people who are experiencing all stages of breakups or divorce or separation, whether you're newly separated or divorced, whether you're navigating the divorce or separation process right now, whether you're already divorced and you're trying to navigate how to start that new chapter in your life. So we have circles for everyone, no matter what stage you're in. Now, with that being said, as I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, we do have a special offer for you. Using code GUY30, you will have a 30% discount to Circles for 3 months, and you'll receive an email shortly with all of the details about using the coupon and how to join Circles. And starting as soon as you open that email, you no longer have to deal with your heartache and heartbreak alone. So I want to thank Guy again for joining. I want to thank you all for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you are in the world, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Have a good day,
And a good
everybody.
night, because some of you, I know it's late, so good night.
Good night, good day, and we'll see you soon. Bye.